And so in order for states to make sure that they are fiscally solvent and can pay their bills and everything else and not be a larger burden on taxpayers, they should wean themselves off of federal funds. Hello, welcome to this week's economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me again today. Well, I have a lot to talk about, so I want to get right to it. The title of this one is going to be about banning TikTok and depending on federal funds weaken liberty. They do that and so much more. In this week's economy, it's episode 58. It's already number 58. I can't believe it, but let's get to it. I'm going to talk about what's the latest on the state level jobs report, TikTok, inflation, and conservatism, and what does all that mean, and try to do it in about 10 minutes. So let's get to it, all right? First of all, what will happen with TikTok because Congress passed a bill banning it? This past week, they passed a $95 billion bill that includes funding for Ukraine, Russia war issue, to Israel, and also to Taiwan. Those are the big foreign affairs money that were sent from taxpayers, of course. There has been no war that has been actually designated by Congress or confirmed by Congress and the president, but we're going to continue to send them a lot of money. And we don't have any money, so this is going to add to the deficit and debt and further provide fiscal insanity and insolvency for our federal government. It's a bad situation overall, whether or not those are even good issues to do, as there were no spending offsets put in place or anything like that. But it also included a ban on TikTok, that social media app that gets so much hoopla and noise about it being owned by China and other things. It's not. It's actually owned by someone who lives in Singapore now. People in America also own a lot of the shares of that stock. But regardless, there is a connection between the Chinese Communist Party, which maybe or maybe not is a big issue, but many people use TikTok even knowing what is going on that platform. I happen to not use TikTok. A big reason why is I'm already on enough social media platforms. I don't want to be on another one. And maybe some of this other issue gets to me as well, where I hear about it in the news. But in general, I'm for people having freedom and liberty to do what they want. And if it comes down to it that China is taking information, how are they going to use it? People in America should know about that and choose not to use it. That's how competition, free market capitalism works. We don't need a top-down approach that pushes out certain competition in the marketplace just because we don't like it. And that's too often what's coming down to things like TikTok. So we'll see. They put a ban. It takes about 9 to 12 months, depending on if the president gives it 3 more months for them to sell off any sort of Chinese ownership of this social media app, TikTok. We'll see if that happens, and I'll try to provide more information. But I think this is a bad situation. It sets a horrible precedent for how many other firms are going to be banned or things of that nature, even if there are some other issues. Let's let markets work. People decide better than governments every single time, okay? Another issue I want to talk about is how would increasing government create a more justly ordered society? There was a tweet here recently, post, if you will, on X, formerly known as Twitter, by Wesley Cooper Smith, who is a friend and someone who I knew and worked with at Texas Public Policy Foundation. He's now at the Heritage Foundation as chief of staff to the president there. And he talked about how the justly ordered society is really what we need. And the old right, the libertarians who have been leading for so long, have been more focused on free markets compared to families. And I think this is absolutely wrong. What we really need is we need more free markets that allows for the family and communities and everyone else to prosper more. And that's what's been done throughout human history and everything else. I think we need more of that throughout our economy. And too much, we're getting more into socialism and not capitalism at the end of the day. And if you have a justly ordered society, right, you're going to have controls and bigger government and authoritarianism at the end of the day. And so I think this new right of this national conservatism, I'm putting air quotes up there, is the wrong direction. It's really just old progressivism, because what they want is just people in power who can do exactly what they want and maybe will head things in the right direction according to them. But as soon as someone else comes into power, they're going to send them in the other direction. This is not a good situation. This is not what their founding fathers wanted. I hope that we can basically reject that form of conservatism and move towards one that is based on free market capitalism and limited government, the part that has been the linchpin, the basis for our ability to grow and have more prosperity across the country. Let's go back to that. In other news, inflation inflation remains and will remain persistent because of bad policies in D.C. Too much government spending leading to too much debt. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet, its monetary base, is actually increasing again. So and they're buying more of those treasuries that are being issued by the Treasury because of the massive amount of debt that's out there of more than 34 trillion, nearly $35 trillion. This is not going to end well. It's going to continue to have more inflation and higher interest rates for a longer period of time, as I've been saying. In other news, the latest state jobs report by the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that Texas led over the last year, but job growth is slowing across most of the country. Even in Texas, even though they've added the most jobs in number-wise, it's only growing by about 2% year over year. Florida has a faster growth rate now than Texas at 2.2%. California is right up there in numbers because they're the largest state in population across the country, but they're only a little over 1% growth in their labor, in their jobs, job creation. And so that's not a good situation. Well, we've also seen since the pandemic, E.J. Antoni of the Heritage Foundation, a former colleague when I was at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, provides a nice chart showing where states are what they look like compared to before the pandemic. What you'll notice is that mostly red states are at the top. They've been the ones leading the way. Idaho, Utah, Florida, and Texas are the top four. Nevada, a bluer state, is one of the only ones in the top 10, is the only one in the top 10. And all the blue states are at the bottom. Hawaii, Maryland, Vermont, Louisiana, the only red state near the bottom, is second to last. And there's only been about 8 states now that have not had more jobs being added back, getting back to zero, if you will, since the pandemic. And it shows what the costly effects were of the pandemic and the bad policies thereafter of not reducing in the size and scope of government can lead to. And so I think that's a situation that we really need to get a tackle on as quickly as possible in all of the states. Sustainable budgets, less regulation, and lower taxes would be the key to that pro-growth policy. You know, another news, why should Texas and other states wean themselves off of federal funds? And what should Texas do with another nearly $20 billion in general fund surplus and about $27 billion in the rainy day fund? Well, first of all states should wean themselves off of federal funds. You know, I've been talking about this for a while, and given my time as chief economist of the Office of Management and Budget in the Trump White House, I got to look a lot at the federal budget. And even then, we had some insolvency issues that were going on, and we were trying to rein some of that in. Trump could have done a better job on that in talking about reducing spending, but at least internally, that's what we were trying to do. But now, since Biden's been in office and the pandemic and the spending under Trump and just Congress in general being inept at this, we really see that we have a fiscal crisis because of the excessive government spending. And the one thing that they're going to want to do, they being Congress, is going to reduce the amount of spending to states. They're going to send a lot less over time through Medicaid, welfare programs, transportation, and other things. Those are going to be some of the first places that I think they're going to have to cut. And so in order for states to make sure that they are fiscally solvent and can pay their bills and everything else and not be a larger burden on taxpayers, they should wean themselves off of federal funds. Texas State Representative Brian Harrison said recently, had a good press release out saying, look, we should wean ourselves off of these federal funds. I've talked to him recently. I think that's a great idea. He was putting it in place because of Biden administration's reviews on Title IX within education about transgenders and other things. That's one issue to look at. But I think in general, we need to be looking at how do we get off of the federal funds dependency that so many states have, ranging from 33% of their total budget to 45 to almost 50% of their total budget in some states. This is just, it's unsustainable. We need sustainable budgets that are being passed and less federal funds, because remember, it's all coming out of your pocket as taxpayers, whether it's the left pocket or the right pocket or a back pocket. They're taking it from you from state, federal, and local governments. So that's something we need to look at. In Texas, with this massive with the massive surpluses, California is the one running massive deficits, the massive surpluses of nearly $20 billion more dollars that Governor Abbott has talked about and Comptroller Glenn Hager has talked about. And there's going to be about $27 billion left in the rainy day fund. So we're looking at almost $50 billion floating around again in Texas. I think we need to take a good hard look at reducing those federal funds, maybe replacing some of that federal funds with those funds so that way you can get them out of education and healthcare and some other places, and also look at cutting property taxes in Texas or cutting income taxes in states that have an income tax. Get those to zero as quickly as possible with and make sure that you're reining in government spending. That's the key part of this is making sure not to overspend. So those are some key issues there. In other news, states should end taxpayer-funded lobbying, as it's mostly against taxpayers through your taxpayer dollars, whether it be in Texas, Louisiana, or in other places. Taxpayer-funded lobbying is a big problem, mostly in education, healthcare, the big sectors where government already has a huge influence over. They don't want to lose control in those marketplaces, and so they pay the governments, right, use your tax money to pay people to go and lobby the state and federal government to bring in more money. That's not what this is all about. It just grows government in the process, and instead, we need to allow the private sector, nonprofits, individuals, and others to do that sort of lobbying, to speak on the backs of people, for people, instead of governments growing government. So that's something we want to keep an eye on. In other news, should Iowa, Minnesota, Texas, and other states have a universal basic income, or UBI? Check out my latest commentary with John Hendrickson of the Iowa for Tax Relief Foundation in the governing. We basically make the case that we don't need a universal basic income, and we don't need these pilot projects by local governments with federal funds that are going to dry up and go away. Then they're going to have a quote-unquote entitlement for these people that they've been sending money to, so they're going to have to raise taxes and increase government spending and grow government more. And none of this is connected with work. It's just kind of quote-unquote free cash. Nothing is free, right? But it's free cash going out to them, and they're not going to spend it wisely, and they're going to be in the same situation they were before. And that's what all the evidence has shown in the past, and that's why we don't need a universal basic income. I am in favor of something called an empowerment account, where you would give funds to those who are already eligible for safety net programs, but you also replace the safety net programs that are out there. And so I think that's closer to what Milton Friedman thought about and Frederick Hayek talked about, not where everybody gets money, but a certain select group of those who are lower income, and it's connected to work, so that way they'll be more prosperous in the future. I think that's the way to go. In other news, how should states deal with electric grid issues like Texas does? No, they should not. Texas passed this $10 billion loan guarantee program of a Texas Energy Fund last session, which is going to give handouts to natural gas plants basically across the state. This is a terrible idea. It's just socialism and nationalism, where they're coming in and trying to force the marketplace. Instead, they should be going after all of the government influence and subsidies, production tax credits to win in solar and unreliable sources of energy. They should be going after them instead and removing those obstacles, removing severance taxes on oil and gas, level the playing field and let the markets work. We should also be removing regulations and the onerous sort of path to providing nuclear energy. I think that's really the future for energy and helping the electrical grids and everything else. It's not wind and solar that are unreliable, of course, when there's no wind and there's no sun. So we need to head in a different direction. So I think Texas gets that part wrong. So don't do that in other states. Make sure you're reducing regulations and removing obstacles. That's the way to go. What is the cost of regulation in America? The American Action Forum puts out this chart, periodically. And as of April 19, 2024, if you look through the first 3 years plus, year 4 really, of each one of the last 3 presidents, you can see what there are. Biden has added $1.37 trillion final rule cost. Trump added $30.1 billion during that time, and Obama created $303.1 billion. So this is a massive amount of rule costs by the Biden administration that has added essentially taxes of nearly $1.5 trillion to the economy. No wonder the economy is growing much slower than anticipated. So that's something else that we need to keep an eye on. Media hits and more. What have I been doing? Well, watch my TV interview on the Just the News with Amanda Head, where we talk about a lot of things, what state governors should be doing of limiting government spending, what should be happening at the federal level, and so much more. Don't miss that interview. Also, don't miss my recent interview with host Scott Bertram on the Future of Freedom podcast. I'm with Angela Rashidi from the American Enterprise Institute, and we talk about how SNAP should be reformed. She was recorded, and then I was recorded on a separate day. We come at it from different angles, but I think it's a good discussion. I've had Angela on my podcast before. She has a lot of wealth of knowledge. We didn't quite agree on some things, but be sure to check that out. I'm also happy to announce that I'm partnering with the Kansas Policy Institute to assist them with the pro-growth approach on ways to let people prosper. I'm going to remain in Texas. I don't have any anticipation or expectation of leaving Texas. This is my home state. This is where I love to be. No income tax and everything else. But it's great to partner and be affiliated with so many of these other great groups across the country. Please go out and check them out. I'm connected with about 14 different think tanks across the country, and they're all doing great work. So please check that out. And you can check out all my information at vanceginn.com. Check out my blog post, speaking of another great free market think tank, Mackinac Center in Michigan, on the need for a sustainable budget to turn things around there. And also at the Kansas Policy Institute, I have a good first blog post on why Governor Kelly should sign the bold income tax relief there. Please do that. That's the way to go. Regarding my Let People Prosper show, this past Monday, I had on Connor Boyack of the Libertas Institute on mediocrity, his book on school choice. Also, we talked about the roles of limited government and his Tuttle Twin series. Don't miss that one. The upcoming episode is on Monday, is with Dr. Josh Rao on the consequences of the pandemic response, fiscal insolvency, Laffer curve influence, and more. Don't miss that one. It's a great discussion. The quote of the week is by Thomas Sowell, a great economist, where he said, quote, "It is hard to imagine a more stupid or more dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong." Excellent words there. Unfortunately, we need more rules in place because discretion is heading us in the wrong direction. And the Bible verse of the week is from Colossians 3:2. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. We'll be wise to do that. I'm doing that each and every day. I hope you are too. I hope you've enjoyed this. Remember, you get all the show notes at vanceginn.com or at vanceginn.com. And until next time, let people prosper.